What's the difference in drawing a scene that we take as much time as we need to do to create the effect we want, and deliberately trying to draw faster? That's the question I decided to challenge myself to answering with a drawing with this scene, because I drew this yesterday in 73 minutes, which for me is quite a long time to spend drawing for a YouTube channel demo. So I thought, well, why don't I give it a go today, trying to draw much faster and then make whatever adjustments I needed to in producing that faster drawing. So this took me 26 minutes to draw in real time. So it was certainly a lot less than half time, a bit more than a third of the time. So let me explain the things I found. And at the end, I'll show the two drawings side by side. And what I would love you to do is to leave a comment telling me which one you think works better. Okay, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I drew them both, unless you don't like either of them. But I would love to hear that, just to see what you think. There are certainly things about each that I prefer personally myself. But the first point I want to make is that it's harder to draw well fast. We're moving faster, we're having to simplify things, we have less time for everything. All the fundamentals still need to line up if we're going to have a successful drawing, regardless of the time we take in drawing it. The composition, the values, the effects that we create, especially in a scene such as this, the effective depth of plane, and whether we have adequate detail to actually convey the meaning that's in the scene. So it's harder to draw fast. The fact that it's going to be simpler does not make it easier. In some ways, it's more challenging to create the same effect with less ink going on the paper. And, in essence, because we're working harder and faster, what we're doing is whatever our normal drawing process is, and by process, I mean the way we understand what we're doing in translating the image or what's in front of us into marks on the paper. Whatever we understand that to be, and whatever patterns, habits, strategies, techniques we use to do that, we have to do them all faster. So to get a good result, I really need to have a sense of what I'm doing overall when I'm drawing. Because otherwise, I'm sort of just lunging here and there and everywhere. At least I had a sense of what I'm trying to do and speeding that up. Now, important thing is more careful observation before we start, because once we start and we're going faster, there will be a certain momentum that keeps pushing us on. And so I need to have all the main things from the reference worked out. And I'm not talking so much about what things are there and the shapes that are there, but I'm talking particularly about where the shapes are in proportion to each other and the values and the effects that I need to create, because I need to make marks that tie all these things in together. Now, one of the ways I simplified this was I only used 2 pens instead of, I can't remember whether it was 3 or 4 pens yesterday, but different widths of pen. And so I just used a 0.2 and a 0.1 millimeter uni pen, because I couldn't afford to be chopping and changing so much and working out when to change. What I did was I basically looked at this and saw a diagonal line that goes from the top of the rock on the left-hand side down to the top of the rock on the right-hand side, and below that was the 0.2 and above that was the 0.1, with the 0.2 though going a little bit slower and heavier with the very closest, darkest parts, and with the 0.1 going a bit lighter and looser for the furthest elements. So I'm trying to create the same effect, but without having to chop and change so much. And as I said, it's also just the mental working out, when will I change from this to that I wanted to simplify, because we are simplifying what we're doing. We're not trying to draw the same marks more quickly, particularly in a scene such as this with a lot of hatching. Not trying to do that at all. It's not as if you could take the drawing I did yesterday and remove every second line and, well, that's what we're trying to do. No, there are some parts where we're going to do as many lines as we did yesterday, and there are other parts where we may not do any lines in the space where we did a considerable number of lines yesterday. So it's not an easy every second part we need to not do, because we're still trying to create a certain effect. There's still a visual impact of how the scene looks and what it conveys to us that we want to capture. And that means there will still be a greater focus on some parts and less of a focus on other parts. And if you're finding this interesting, please hit the like button for me. One of the big sacrifices I worked out was with the mid values. I'm going to be more, well, black and white. And because in a scene such as this, a lot of time goes into playing around with the mid values, creating this sort of grey scale mid tone, but still trying to let it differentiate things, not to let it be too much the same all over. Well, that takes quite a lot of time making all those adjustments, going slowly enough that we can make adjustments, that we don't go too dark too quickly. Much less of that. There will be darker darks and lighter lights, and that will save us some time. Now, because there's going to be less hatching, there is also more emphasis on non-hatching line work, and particularly in the greenery, in the leaves, the foliage that we have in the upper right-hand side. You can see what I've done now is really quite different to what I did yesterday. In fact, I think it's actually perhaps might work a little bit more successfully than what I did yesterday. This was one part I wasn't particularly happy with yesterday's drawing, so I was deliberately trying to really shake up what I did there, not just to do it faster or in a more simple way, but to actually do it differently. So I was happy for the chance to do that. We need, I think, more spaces between things because we're going to have less hatching and less control to create distinction between what's what. I think we simply need to allow more white paper for what I think of as visual breathing space. Basically gaps between things or gaps on things that will just help us understand what we're seeing more easily. So that's another one of my aims here. Not to get too intense in any one part and then to go back and add some intensity. We still have this principle of we don't commit to our extremes, particularly in darkness, but also in detail until the end when we have the whole scene there, and then we can actually make some slight adjustments. Yesterday, after I'd finished it, went back and added a bit of darkness on that large rock on the left-hand side. Today, I actually went back and just added a little bit more emphasis on the outline and the hatching on the lower right rock. So it'll be interesting to see how they compare. But I need to keep looking at the overall effect of what I'm doing. Now, I always, before I started drawing, experiment with some marks, usually marks that are to do with how do I create the effect of what I'm seeing. So particularly areas such as foliage or the way the rocks curve. Sometimes my focus is on proportion, just how does it feel to put the lines down and create the right proportion. Now, I still did this today, but it was really to do with how few lines can I use. So I actually drew that large rock on the lower right, but instead of working out to see how can I best capture all of the effect of the rock surface of the three-dimensional form, it was more how few lines can I use, how little hatching can I get away with and still be able to read what the object is, how it looks, how the light hits on it in a consistent way. So we're getting pretty close to the end at this point because this further part I did actually a lot more lightly, a lot less marks, and I think I probably worked better here because I really stopped trying to draw the objects and just tried to get the values, those darker value areas. I'll put a link to yesterday's video as the end screen for this one if you'd like to see what was involved in the thinking and the drawing of the more involved one. And you'll notice here doing the tree trunks that we can see in the distance. So we have lots of foliage interrupting our view of them. I do a lot of horizontal hatching for the value of tree trunks because that helps them to stand out from the more vertical hatching for the foliage. But I also, when I do them, make sure that I leave lots of gaps going down them for the what I think of as visual interference, the visual disturbance of the leaves, that often if the light's on them in a certain way, we almost can't see that they're leaves, that they're foliage, but they're just this light blur that's in front of them. So I want to get that sense, and I want to create a tangle. I don't want anything that's in the distance to feel too precise because we don't see anything in the distance precisely. We see the rocks in the foreground and just some of the elements where there's nothing in front of us with the foliage. Otherwise, it really is a tangle. And in terms of the Australian bush, that's a very characteristic part of it. So I still want to have that sense of tangle, but also brightness. And I think at the end here, I needed to do a little bit more darkness just to tweak the sense of brightness. And so that's what I'm doing just now. And you've been watching this at double the speed I drew it in. And we're just about done. And then we'll compare it side by side with yesterday. So I'm just adding a few more darkness areas. As I said, I'd love to hear your comment below on which one you feel works better as a drawing. If you could only have one, which one would it be? So that's, and I decided that this rock here looked a bit oversimplified, and so I just added a few marks. But again, it was important to refer back to the reference at this point and not just try and add some marks onto it blindly, because they would have just looked random and possibly tempted me to overdraw them. And then I was thinking, it looks a bit like a pelican, doesn't it? Don't you hate it when you see faces and animals in things that you draw? Never mind, can't be helped. It's too late now. Adding a little more value down here just to visually anchor the values as well and to have that part come forward so the rest goes back. But first we'll take off the tape and I'll do my best not to tear the paper. I have a pretty terrible track record on that, but this came off fairly easily. So, firstly, what do you think of this drawing as a drawing to capture that scene? Do you think this works? Does it look oversimplified? Well, here it is now, side by side with yesterday's drawing that was probably 2.5 times the length of time. How do you think they compare? Have I lost things in the second one? Or are there things that are better conveyed in the second one? Personally, I feel this more simplified, faster one doesn't lose anything particularly that's in the first one. And I find that there is greater clarity in what's happening in that foliage section in the upper right. So perhaps that was a bit of a surprise for me because I was pretty happy with yesterday's drawing. But what do you think? Please let me know. I'd love to hear. And now a few minor adjustments. Again, looking at my simplified one, my faster one, I thought there's just a little bit of adjustments that I can make. It's really important to do this at the end, and sometimes with a few minutes gap between finishing and actually adding anything, we can just see how our drawing looks. So I'm not worried about my reference at this point. I'm actually looking at how my drawing stands on its own as a drawing and thinking, are there some changes I can make? Just a few more, and then that's it, I think. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this interesting. I hope you have a go drawing this scene, whether you do it the long way or the faster way. It's always great to push our skills in new directions and have new experiences in our drawing because we do learn that way. But in the end, whichever way you decide to draw, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.